Good evening, I'm Larry Lorenz. A year ago this coming week, the Times-Picayune switched to 3 times a week home delivery, and the region's media have been adjusting ever since. We'll look tonight at where the changes are taking us. We'll also examine the state versus the federal government over a common core for education and vouchers, and the governor's resistance. We'll also look at the judge and key players in the Danziger case and the latest on the flood district lawsuit. Our Future Watch segment discusses the emerging theater district downtown. Taking up all that are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Kevin McGill, reporter for the Associated Press. Dawn Ostrom, our Future Watch reporter. And Stephanie Grace, columnist for the New Orleans Advocate. And Errol, over the last year, we've seen a tremendous change in the way we get our information here in the city.
It's certainly been an interesting time. It's sometimes maddening, it's sometimes fulfilling, but I tried to put together some significant changes over what this has meant over the last year, and I came up with a list of 5. The first thing is certainly the changing role of the Times-Picayune. A daily newspaper is, to me, I've always said, it's like a maternal figure. You know, it's there all the time. You know, it's there in the morning. It gives you the bad news when you need it, the good news when you need it. It celebrates with you. It mourns with you, and so it's always there. I mean, it's a part of the community life. The Times-Picayune doesn't have that role anymore. It's a newspaper. It's a 3 times a week newspaper, and it's still, for the most part, a good newspaper. But it doesn't have that monopoly role or that leadership role or that maternal role that it used to have. And where it's gone, we'll just see. From the Newhouse perspective, they might be happy because they've certainly cut their expenses, and who knows that they're probably doing better in profit with fewer expenses. But it's not the same leadership role in the community that it had, and you could argue, shouldn't the newspaper, take that role? Then there's the other part of the emergence of the Advocate. If you remember, the Advocate moved into this market last year. It's just pretty much an extension of the Baton Rouge Advocate, the New Orleans edition. And all of a sudden, when John Georges brought it, and then it became really serious. And a lot of the best of the brightest, and including people like Stephanie, who are part of the Picayune, are now working for the Advocate. So the Advocate is really upgraded. It has a very good staff, and it's become a very good newspaper to maintain my maternal figure analogy. The Advocate right now is probably in the stepmother role here, and like a stepmother, you have to kind of prove yourself to the people out there, and is trying to endear itself with a very active PR campaign. And so, part of the story of next year is going to be what happens to the Advocate. If are people going to embrace it? Is there room for this daily newspaper when you have a thrice weekly? But the product is good, but we just have to see where the marketing is going to take it. The other factor is how this has affected television, and you see some interesting tie-ins with television. You're seeing the Advocate having a tie-in with Channel 4, and you see the Times-Picayune having a tie-in with Channel 8. And I think that's pretty healthy because you have TV and newspapers being able to use the best of their resources. The internet, I think NOLA.com still dominates on the internet, but you're seeing more people emerge in this. You're seeing television getting more active in the internet, and you're seeing things like the Linz and the Uptown Messenger, who are providing news not only for themselves but for the other news media. And the fifth thing is, I think New Orleans just sent a message. There were many cities where the Newhouses cut back their newspaper, but no city fought like New Orleans. And New Orleans had met the most, and there was the most passion. And so I think this is going to be a story that's going to make journalism history one day, and New Orleans will be looked at as a city that gave a damn on all this. And so the saga continues.
From the standpoint of someone who went from the Times-Picayune to the Advocate, what would you say, Stephanie?
Well, I have to say we're really happy with how things are going at the Advocate. I show up at work, and it's the people I worked with for many years over at the Picayune for the most part. And, a lot of us were not comfortable with some of the changes. Obviously, that's why we're not there anymore. And, we, after having gone through Katrina, having been part of this community and having played that role, it feels good to be able to try to do that again because people seem to want it. They tell us they want it. So
in some of the veterans from the States Item and Times-Picayune days talk about the way in which there was said fierce competition.
Right. Even when
is
they
that
combined.
same sense of fierce competition existing now?
Fierce. Friendly competition among the staffs. Obviously, many of us work together. A lot of the people at the Picayune are new, so we're not veterans of this market. But you know, for those of us who have longstanding ties, we're partners and we're still friends, and hopefully we will continue to be. We get together for drinks every now and then and talk it all out. And
But it's been a long time
There's
since
some-
there were two newspapers and they could look at each other and one person could say, we got this story and they didn't, or vice
Yeah.
versa. And so
Yeah.
there is that.
there is
I
that.
mean,
And if you look on Twitter, you see some kind of friendly banter, trash tweeting, whatever you want to call it. So.
The same sort of phenomenon, as I understand it, is in other cities, though, Errol, of combinations. You've got an internet newspaper, perhaps, a television station, and a newspaper, and they're all cooperating, and they're all unrelated.
I think that's very much the future, but especially, I think more so here, because if you look, for example, Channel 4 has, I think, 3 people who were with the Times-Picayune.
Two
who were
now.
reporters there, okay?
Yeah.
And so you have some of that newspaper expertise.
And we're running their stories in the newspaper, Mike Pearlstein and David Hammer.
And the thing about newspaper reporters is that they tend to be more of beat reporters, and so they tend to have more of an expertise in the area that they cover. And so I think it's good to have, for TV, to have access to newspaper reporters. I think it enriches TV coverage.
You know, the one thing that hasn't really changed in all of it is radio news.
Right.
No,
As we've seen all these changes in TV and newspaper, we haven't seen much change in this market in radio.
and the fact is, radio, there are fewer people owning more stations now. We saw in the past week, both stations, people might remember the old WSMB, which is now operated by WWL, and they're making some changes with that. And so that station has become like a feeder for WWL, and so there's not as much radio as used to be. The old 690 frequency, which for several years was doing some pretty interesting talk, is now religious broadcasting, which is okay, but it tends to reach a fairly small audience. And so other than WWL and then on FM, the
WWNO is expanded.
99.5, there's not as much as that talk radio as there used to be.
Right.
Well, Stephanie Grace, the Tea Party and others are boiling mad about the Federal Common Core.
What
that
they call a
it.
Federal Common Core.
Federal Common Core, yes, but they're educational standards.
Sure.
And you've written about those. There seems to be a misunderstanding about the whole thing.
Right, and part of that is, as I said, the role of the federal government in here. There is this idea that this is a federal K-12 curriculum that the government is coming in and trying to impose. That's not the backstory on this. The Common Core is a set of standards that was developed really by the National Governors Association, by the states, with the support of a lot of governors,
And
including
the president
Bobby
of the
Jindal.
National Governors Association is?
I'm not sure now. It's not Bobby Jindal. He's the Republican Governors Association, different group. This is the bipartisan one. So it was done by Democrats and Republicans together. It does have the support of the president, and there are incentives. It's voluntary. States can adopt these standards voluntarily. Most have, 45, 46 of them have, and there are some federal incentives. So the president's support is actually one of the things that makes it controversial in this environment, in this kind of Tea Party-driven environment. When these were passed a few years ago without a lot of notice, but they're hitting schools now. Louisiana just started introducing these standards into the curriculum this year. There's testing that goes along with it that starts next year. And the idea is that they want to be able to compare how students in different states are doing and raise the standards to be competitive in the new global economy. This is something that has support from a lot of corporations, the Chamber of Commerce, ExxonMobil. As I said, a lot of Republicans. What's happened recently, it's become something of a cause celeb in kind of the Tea Party mode that we are getting used to here. And a lot of the same tactics, a lot of the same ideas are being tossed around. There are people calling it Obamacare, Obamacare. So there's a real pushback, and it's interesting to watch Governor Jindal because he was a strong supporter of this, as were many of his allies, and he's getting some pushback by people who are normally his members of his base.
You may recall that meeting of conservatives, the Red State meeting, where he came, he got up to talk. He had to kind of wriggle around some of the questions about Common Core because he has embraced it, and his education superintendent has embraced it.
Right, and there was an attempt in the legislature last year to push back, and that was beaten down really by his allies in the legislature. State Representative Cameron Henry this week came out and said he's going to try again, kind of on the crest of this wave of opposition that's forming in different places. St. Tammany, there are public meetings. There are some town hall meetings coming up. And what the governor has said is, he said, I'm against federal standards, but I think this is important. But I think if you want to look at what's really going to happen, I think you have to look at his allies, like Superintendent John White, State Senator Conrad Appel, who's the education chair in the Senate, who's a strong ally. They're sticking with it, and a lot of groups are now coming out and making a strong case for it, like the Baton Rouge Chamber, Louisiana Association of Business and Industry. I mean, not crazy left-wing groups by any means, but they're saying, this is something we need to do in order to have an educated workforce.
In the meantime, Kevin, the governor proposed a voucher system to allow students who are in substandard schools to move into better schools if they wish. And now that's created another state-federal brawl.
We're back during, the governor piloted this basically in New Orleans in 2008. In 2012, as part of a very big overhaul of education, he got past the statewide voucher program, which in some areas will send lower moderate income students to private schools on the taxpayer dime if they're attending lower performing public schools. And what happened, that's the latest controversy is that a couple of weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago, the Justice Department came in and said, look, there are 22 school districts that are still under civil rights era desegregation orders. And we want to make sure that in future years there are no vouchers issued there until and unless we figure out how it's going to affect the desegregation orders. The Obama, the Jindal administration reacted with outrage, although arguably this shouldn't have been that big a surprise. There was talk back there in 2012 that this might run afoul or at least affect desegregation orders. A federal judge here in New Orleans has already tried to block vouchers in Tangipahoa Parish because of desegregation orders. That has been stopped right now. It's under appeal, but that's just one in a number of clashes that the Jindal administration has had with the Obama administration. You can go back to the very beginning when the fiscal stimulus was passed, and Jindal was kind of cherry-picked what he was going to take out of that, and he was very critical of it overall. You go on to the vouchers, to the various education issues. As a matter of fact, education issues is one of the few areas where they're kind of strange bedfellows,
really
but you don't really, nobody wants to exactly acknowledge it.
Everybody focuses on the kind of, this is a marginal area. In broader education terms, they really are on the same page.
Well, when you think about it, the Tea Party is on the same page with some Democrats on Common Core and unions. The Obama administration, which is usually painted as solely in the corner of unions, has really angered some teacher unions with their support of charter schools and Common Core in some instances, Teach for America. And the Jindal administration, meanwhile, John White, who is his handpicked Secretary of Education, was a protege of Arne Duncan, who is the Education Secretary for the Obama administration.
And it's interesting to watch Jindal kind of throw all this into one pot and stir it up. I think he's actually kind of enjoying this because he gets to go out and denounce the federal government, and he is now running some ads that he's paying for with his leftover campaign money, and he is saying, I'm against this lawsuit and I'm against Obamacare. And there you go.
The Justice Administration, the Justice Department's filing in the voucher suit was a little curious, and they're trying to spin it as though, look, we're not trying to kill vouchers. Their spin doesn't entirely make sense, and the governor seems to be overreacting at least just a little bit.
Right.
But again, the governor, I think, anytime he can separate himself, anytime a politician in Louisiana, especially one who courts the conservative Republican vote, can separate themselves from the Obama administration, they take any opportunity to do so.
And one where is having such trouble with his own poll ratings. I mean, he's definitely sees this as an opportunity, I think.
Maybe this can kind of just move the spotlight away from Common Core for a little while.
Well, and, you had a great line ending your column today saying Governor Jindal really ought to send Eric Holder a thank you note for allowing this
to play out. Well, it was funny. I think the Justice Department might be backing off a little and wrote this letter that said some of the things Kevin was talking about. You know, we're not really messing with vouchers. And Jindal called that a PR stunt.
Yeah, they came out with this letter. Well, they sent a letter to John Boehner and the Republican leadership in the House saying that we've reached a breakthrough. The state has agreed to provide this information. Well, there's all kinds of disagreement over what information they're providing and whether it was available in the first place. As soon as that letter came out, Jindal came out with a statement saying this is a PR stunt where they're still trying to kill vouchers. Yeah. And meanwhile, they kind of overshadowed a news conference by the Black Alliance for Education Opportunity in support of vouchers. Right. So it may have worked out for somebody, I'm just not sure who yet.
Well, Stephanie, you had an interesting perspective on the judge and some of the key players in the Danziger Bridge case in a column last week.
Yeah, it was. It's interesting to kind of watch how all this has played out, because if you go back in time, really all of these key players, Fred Hebe, Jim Lenton, and now Judge Kurt Engelhardt, they all made it to the courthouse the same way. They were all Republicans who, when George W. Bush was elected, that fateful night that the Supreme Court, stopped the voting, that set all of this in motion. And those jobs at the federal courthouse, those are political spoils, always have been. And the jockeying immediately started for who was going to be U.S. attorney and who was going to get the open federal judgeships. The initial frontrunner to get that U.S. attorney spot, of course, was Fred Hebe, who was a landfill owner, was a lawyer, hadn't really practiced much law, but had contributed a lot of money to Republicans. So he had Governor Mike Foster, Congressman Billy Tozam, Vitter, it turned out. Vitter, who interestingly told me back in the day that he thought it was more important to have someone with management experience than legal experience. And if you kind of look back now, maybe, that office could have been, maybe he was right. But what he wanted out of that, he was in Congress at the time, he wanted his good friend, personal lawyer, campaign treasurer, Kurt Engelhardt, appointed to one of those federal judgeships. So, as the process proceeds, obviously Fred Hebe does not get the job because there are allegations of domestic violence. And meanwhile, there's Jim Lenton, the career attorney who didn't have a political sponsor, waiting in the wings to move into that job. He ends up going after Fred Hebe, and as we all know, everything blew up. Fred Hebe hires lawyers who end up unmasking some of the anonymous commenters in Lenton's office. That ends up bringing the Lenton office down. And now here we have Kurt Engelhardt saying because of that whole scandal, he's throwing out the Danziger Bridge verdict, which is just a landmark verdict, the police shooting after Katrina.
And collateral damage here is the image of the Justice Department, which was supposed to be the sheriff in town, is coming in to clean up the police department and continue to root out federal corruption. Right. The consent decree, the police consent decree, which the city is now fighting, they're using the Sal Perricone postings as one reason why it should be thrown out. They're not getting anywhere with it, but they're trying. And then there are other cases. The Nagin case.
Ray Nagin being most more. That case is coming up in a few weeks if it's not continued. His lawyers are saying, and Sal Perricone was caught online basically saying, if you have guns, this is where Ray Nagin lives. I mean, some really horrible stuff. The other thing that maybe is taking a little bit of a hit is, the judiciary. I have to say, in the week or so since this has happened, I think conventional wisdom is kind of deciding that maybe Judge Engelhardt overreacted, and maybe you could say that there was all kinds of horrible behavior in the U.S. Attorney's Office. It wasn't their case. It was a case out of Washington, but that doesn't justify overturning these verdicts and making these families go through a trial again.
Well, it's a good thing we have two newspapers. We can follow it in stereo from now. Dawn Ostrom, Jerry Seinfeld, right as we speak, is just rolling in the newly carpeted aisles of the Sanger Theater. The Sanger, of course, now is the crown jewel of an emerging theater district downtown.
It's a very different, it's a kind of theater district that New Orleans hasn't had before. We had a movie theater district back when the Sanger first opened, and then it was joined by the Joy Theater and the Lowe's Theater, and there wasn't all this live entertainment. And I was inside the Sanger this morning, and it rivals any theater in New York you've been to. It is a beautiful theater with fantastic sound. the stars twinkle again in the sky. 52
And on stage,
we hope. Jerry Seinfeld tonight, and a whole Broadway series throughout the year, starting with the Book of Mormon next month. $52 million renovation that, you know, had some false starts and eventually got going, had some delayed openings. It was originally, I don't even know if it's originally anymore, was supposed to have been open this spring, is now finally open and back right
Well,
across.
when they had the Sound of Marquee opening in 2011.
You're right, opening in 2011. So yes, definitely pushed back a couple times. And now right across the street, the Joy Theater underwent a $5 million renovation. That was built in 1946, is back. The Civic Theater, built in 1906, is back. All of them live venues. La Petite Theater is back. There's talk that maybe the Orpheum still will come back, and the Lowe's, and the Mahalia Jackson is still operating as a theater too. So we really have this burgeoning live entertainment venues around the city where the city's able to appeal to different size shows, more intimate shows that'll be across the street from the Sanger at the Joy Theater, larger shows, seats 600 more people, and a much larger stage area and orchestra pit at the newly renovated Sanger. We've never had that kind of we've never had a theater district that was live entertainment theater. It is a kind of a rebirth of Canal Street. The mayor said today it now will give us more impetus to put more music and arts back in our schools, because we will have children in New Orleans who can now walk into the Sanger. Jackie Clarkson talked about walking in when she was 5 years old and never forgetting that first memory. And the New Orleans children of today can walk into that theater and see something and have that first theater memory. And it's kind of back the way it was. New Orleans is also one of 43 cities that participates in Broadway across America. It's the traveling Broadway shows. And we have the largest one-week subscription base of any of those 43 cities. So there is definitely an appetite for live theater in New Orleans, and that appetite can be filled more. There's now room for the ballet and the symphony and the theater to all have venues. So it's a very exciting time, but it cost an awful lot, $52 million to get that theater back after it was damaged in Katrina.
You know, one of the drawbacks of the Sanger as a performance theater was, as beautiful as it was, the stage wasn't very deep. And so even if you brought a big show like a Lion King, which one of Mahalia Jackson, it would be a smaller version of the big show.
Right.
Now they can bring the full production in at this. Yeah.
And Beauty and the Beast is part of Disney. Disney's Beauty and the Beast is part of the series this year. All those big shows can come back.
Well, Stephanie, the flood district lawsuit that we've been keeping an eye on here is spawning another political brouhaha that we've got to look for.
You're talking about the nominations?
Yes.
Yes. So this weekend, by Monday, the nominating committee that is supposed to nominate new members of this Southeast Louisiana Flood Protection Authority is supposed to send 2 names per open seat to Governor Jindal. John Berry, Tim Duty, the 2 leaders who are behind this lawsuit, want to be renominated. The governor has pretty much said he will not renominate them, and he said Garrett Graves, his coastal aide, used the term litmus test and said the lawsuit is a litmus test. So everyone's really waiting to see. There are a number of nominees, a number of applicants. There are really specific requirements for these applicants, so some of them are going to be weeded out immediately. But there's a nominating committee that's supposed to be very apolitical, made up of engineering school deans and business leaders and good government group leaders, and they are going to be sending these 2 names per spot to Governor Jindal, and everyone's kind of hanging on with bated breath to see what he's going to do.
Yeah, it's a big question as to whether they're going to find, first of all, enough applicants. Duty and Berry are obviously qualified, and even the governor says they've done a good job, except for that lawsuit.
Right.
Will they have enough applicants when they have to make their nominations, I believe, by midnight Monday, according to the latest.
Right, and if they
legal
don't,
advice.
then the governor does not have to choose from among the names forwarded to him. He can pick his own person.
They still have to meet all the qualifications, but yeah, he picks his own.
Where is the lawsuit heading now? Is it going to happen, or do you know?
I talked to one of the attorneys a week or so ago, and they said right now it got moved from civil district court to federal court don't be surprised if it gets moved after all the machinations back to civil district court. It's going to take a while for that to play out, and it just depends, I think we've discussed before, it's still costing the flood board will have to pay that attorney if it's dropped. That's the poison pill aspect.
Right.
If the governor replaces everybody on that board eventually, or the legislature, which is more likely next session, changes the makeup of the board or the rules under which the board operates, and that lawsuit is dropped, the flood board is going to be on the hook for most likely hundreds of thousands, if not by then millions of dollars for the work on the lawsuit.
And one thing that's interesting that's happening is the lawyers handling the flood suit, they're starting to organize politically a little bit too, and I think we're going to see a pushback PR effort.
Yeah, and maybe some other plaintiffs. Yeah,
Let's have a push forward. Errol, what do you see in the near future that we ought to look for?
We'll push forward by looking backward. The original Roosevelt Hotel, before it became the Fairmont, now the Roosevelt again, one of the famous rooms on the first floor was the Fountain Lounge. They used to have some of the live radio broadcasts from there in the Blue Room. Well, the Roosevelt is bringing back the Fountain Lounge in the area around where the Sazerac bar is. It's sort of like a bar and restaurant area and all that. And so it's something from the hotel's past that's being brought back. It'd be a nice addition. If only the Orpheum opens across the street, go to the Orpheum and go to the Fountain Lounge after.
Kevin?
Next week, Obamacare, the registration for the state groups that will be offering private insurance, possibly with help from the federal government to individuals. We start seeing how many people will be signing up, perhaps on Tuesday.
It's going to take a lot of education for people to understand where they stand with it.
A lot of people don't understand it, and a lot of people don't realize, I think, that Tuesday, and meanwhile, the congressional debate is kind of drawing attention away from the fact that Tuesday is the day you start signing up for it.
Dawn?
Eyes Around the World will be back on New Orleans on Monday for two reasons. One, kind of scientific and drive. A BP trial, second phase, starts on Monday in Judge Carl Barbier's courtroom. And Monday Night Football. 0-3 Saints and 0-3 Dolphins, and I'll pick the Saints.
3-0 Saints.
I mean 3-0. Sorry, I said 0-3. 3-0 Saints and 3-0 Dolphins.
Yes.
And I'm picking the Saints.
You are picking
I'm
the
picking the
Saints.
Saints.
And you don't even have Angela's dials.
I don't.
I'm picking that Judge Barbier is going to have to shorten his day,
Yeah, I
too.
don't think he's slated to go till 6 p.m. every day.
Yeah, he's not going to be there at 6 p.m.
Stephanie?
Well, on that note, City Hall has already announced that it's closing early on Monday because, of course, it is right by the Superdome. So get your business done early.
Well, we're closing right on time.
Okay.
Thanks, folks, for being here. Thank you for being with us on Informed Sources. Be back again next week. Good night.